Working hard is stupid. Working hard is Marissa Mayer bragging about her 130-hour work weeks at Yahoo, where she acquired 50 companies that were worthless over 5 years and basically destroyed value of the firm with everyone working 100-hour work weeks, right? You can't get by the 80-20 rule. You need to figure out the few things that matter, the customers that matter, the product, the pricing, and spend your time on those and work smart. We've never tried to reward working hard because you'll just get an organization where everyone's valued for time and seat, an hour in the day, and not outcome. None of us hire the salesperson based on the number of calls they make, right, a week. If salesperson A is 100 calls and 10,000 in sales, and person B is 50 calls and 100,000 in sales, like, I'm going to hire salesperson B. Like, I don't want to reward them for a lot of useless calls. I want to reward them for the 5 calls that actually make a difference.
Hello, and welcome to the Show Your Value podcast, where we explore the art of value creation in 3 macro buckets: material value creation, emotional energy value creation, and spiritual value creation. Today, my very special guest is Robert Glazer. Bob is the founder of Acceleration Partners, a recognized global leader in the affiliate and partnership marketing industry. Acceleration Partners maintain an annual 30% growth over 10 years and has received over 25 industry and company culture awards. Bob was also named to Glassdoor's top list of CEOs of small and medium-sized companies in the U.S. twice, ranking as high as number 2. Bob's popular weekly newsletter, Friday Forward, reaches over 300,000 individuals and business leaders across 60-plus countries. He is a number 1 Wall Street Journal, USA Today, and international best-selling author of 6 books: Elevate Your Team, Friday Forward, How to Thrive in the Virtual Workplace, Performance Partnerships, and Moving to Outcomes. Bob, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me, Lee.
Yeah, where are you at in the world right now?
I'm outside of Boston.
Okay, very nice. I'm sitting here in Arizona. It's absolutely beautiful today, nice and sunny.
It is very unconditionally warm here, which is a good thing, but not a really good thing. But
yeah, and I understand you like to snow ski, so that kind of gets in the way of that in the Northeast.
Yeah. Although most of my skiing this year has been done on the West, they're still getting dumped on, so that's good.
Okay, yeah, Colorado's my favorite state for skiing.
Yeah, I think there's like 10 feet of snow at Mammoth this week or something crazy like that. So it's all feast or famine out there.
Yeah. Hey, when it comes to creating value in the world, you've written 6 books. For our listeners, why have you done that? And I think you've got more books in the works. Talk about that.
I started writing within our industry as a way to sort of express opinions or things that I figured out, and found some success with that, and then realized that as we were growing our company and building our culture, I inherently, like, my sort of why is to kind of find a better way and share it. So if I figure out something that I think can be helpful or is better or could help someone, with their own development or the company's development, I inherently kind of want to share it. And so as we figured out some stuff in the business and the culture, and as same in our industry, I just found myself kind of writing and sharing those learnings.
Okay, yeah, that's fantastic. So I read Elevate, getting ready for this discussion. Got about halfway into Elevate Your Team. Love both the books, and I like how you think about the foundation of building capacity. So you could set the stage, because it's really going to drive this entire conversation around creating value. How do you think about that?
Yeah, and there's some terms similar to I heard you use in the intro, but this concept of capacity building, I think, is the formula for how we get better, and it has 4 parts. And again, in Elevate, it talked about it sort of from a personal context, and Elevate Your Team from a team and organizational context, but it starts with spiritual capacity, intellectual capacity, physical capacity, and emotional capacity. And I think they're like 4 quadrants of a ball that when we're growing them in tandem, it grows, it gets more mass, it rolls faster. If 1 or 2 of those is growing and 1 or 2 of those is shrinking, roll that ball down the hill, it's going to, look a little bit funky. So I'm happy to also take a second and dive into the kind of definition of each of those if it's helpful.
Yeah, it would be really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, so spiritual capacity is not religious. This, for I think most people manifest in their personal core values. It's like what do we care about most? Like what do we really want most, and what's the direction that we're going? And that's why it's the foundation. Intellectual capacity, kind of once you understand that, and this is why they go in order, is sort of how do I kind of learn, plan, execute with discipline? It's your personal operating system. Like how do you get better at doing things faster, more efficiently, and with less energy, right? It's not just about more. It's about, as we add to our operating system, it can do tasks, easier. Physical and mental capacity, I think we understand that one more directly, right? This is our mental and physical wellness and how we're kind of holding up in the world. And then emotional capacity is a couple of things. It's sort of our locus of control, our relationships, and how we relate to the things kind of outside us. So I like to say, like, if we're building a sports car, spiritual capacity would be designing it. Intellectual capacity would be building it. Physical capacity would be like testing it out on a track. But then the difference with emotional capacity is that car is going to do a little better or worse than its specifications when you put it on the road driving 200 miles an hour with kind of other drivers. Now it becomes how it interacts and relates with the world around you. So sometimes that's the hardest one for people. The first three are sort of internal, and then the fourth one is more external.
Yeah, that's interesting. The spiritual side, when I think about it, it's connectedness, and I've heard you talk about this. For me, it's connected with myself. To better understand myself, the better I can create value in the world. But also in the organizational context, it's connected with the community, the other team members, the customers, suppliers, communities, and in general that we engage with. And I think it takes time to develop that. So if we're getting a capability in one area, let's say it's creating material value, it can take a long time to really get good at that. I think it takes the same amount of work and time to manage expectations on the spiritual side. How do you think about that?
Yeah, to me, it's starting with spiritual is like, what is the mountain you want to climb, right? Because I think a lot of people, I could give you an example of what happens when one of these is out of whack, right? You could be doing everything amazingly well, diminish your physical capacity, have a heart attack, and be incapacitated, right? I think we understand that. But I think for a lot of people, spiritual capacity is like, I'm even climbing the right mountain and doing the right work and making the right relationships. Otherwise, I'm going to get to this thing and look around and be like, this is not what I wanted. So that's why I think they go in order. It's what do I want? What are my values? What do I have to learn and get better at? And what am I trying to basically achieve in line with those values? Then you get a little focus on the importance of maintaining your physical and mental health because you understand kind of what you're trying to do. And then what are the relationships that will kind of help me on this? And there's a whole set of relationships. If you are the product of the 5 people you spend the most time with, you can imagine that, like, depending on what you want to do, those could be very different groups of 5 people, right? And push you towards different outcomes or pull you towards different outcomes in that case.
Yeah, that makes sense. Inside organizations, so most of us have a job and we're there to create value. We're being paid and we're doing what we agreed to do. But there is a lot of focus on growth, and I've heard you talk about this growth mindset is turning a lot of people off. Like come in, work to death, and then find somebody new if it's not working out. How do people get their heads around that? Because I do think it's really healthy for any organization to grow, but really grow in a healthy and the right way.
So we're coming off this strange period of free capital that might not be repeated for a long time. And it really, I call it sort of the steroid growth of organizations where, growing the organization was separate from growing the people in the organization. And you can imagine, the best analogy I have for this, Lee, is you can imagine, let's say NASA said, we're going to put a man on Mars or a woman on Mars. And they had this mission and it was televised and they have this crew in the capsule and it lands on Mars and they open it up and all the astronauts fall out and they're dead, right? I don't think we're all going to be standing around cheering for that as sort of a seminal, moment that the capsule made it there and all the people died. But that's sort of what has happened in a lot of high growth companies headed into COVID, to the point where like growth has become kind of a negative thing. You need to have growth because the other flip side is an organization stays the same size. People don't get new skills. There's no opportunity. But growth has just been sort of this net zero gain where, it's not about, if you imagine a wave, what you want is like your people kind of growing with the wave and surfing the wave, not drowning by the wave. And I think the way that growth has been pursued has not brought the people along with it. And that's sort of the framework of Elevate Your Team on sort of how do we rectify this, and how do we grow the business by actually growing the people and focusing on holistically, how do they get better and improve and do all these things.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of creating value and balance. That's why I talk about those three different buckets: material, emotional, energy, and spiritual. And in my experience, so I'm on my seventh company. I've started from scratch, and biggest one had probably around 500 employees, and we had customers in 60 countries. A decent virtual group as well.
Yeah,
but they could work really hard for extended periods of time, and it would give them energy, not take it away. So how do we create environments that even when it's really hard work, it's incredibly energizing? You can do it for long periods of time and not get burnout. How do you think about that?
Yeah, I think and it goes along in terms of my framework, in terms of helping people understand kind of what they want, focusing on a culture that is about learning and growing and improvement. And the holistically, I think a lot of these things these days, and with hybrid and remote work, it's about, you're not like really good at finance and time management at home and then suck at that at work. Like you're not really energized at home and then walk into work tired. Like we're kind of the same person. So understanding that the opportunity is to kind of improve all of those things. Again, cultures that help people learn, get better, improve, cultures that don't diminish physical and mental capacity, and that actually give people the time off they need to rest and relax and all those things. And then finally, again, just focusing on psychological safety in environments where people feel that they can say a thing, talk truth to power, that it's open, there's not fear, like and that the relationships are additive, right, at work, not that you're trying to not that they're additive, they're not diminishing, your capacity.
Yeah. I find a lot of folks talk about culture, psychological safety, leadership development, a lot of things. And it comes off to me as almost, it's in the category I call business virtue signaling, because they really
don't even know what it means. No one can define, I have a definition. No one can define psychological safety. Everyone talks about it, but yeah.
Right. So practically, how do you, create the environment of the culture? I mean, this capacity building culture that you're advocating for here, what are some practical steps to move in that direction and make it happen?
Yeah, look, psychological safety is just trust at scale. So if you and I work together, Lee, and we have this kind of relationship, and I feel like I can say anything and it feels pretty open, then I'm willing to say this is a bad idea, or I think we should reconsider this. You don't have the sort of emperor has no clothes problems. But in environments where that's not the case, it's you have the opposite. So again, creating that culture where modeling that when you get feedback, saying thank you. When someone challenges you in a meeting, don't say like shut up or Jim, like I don't want to hear from you. Say Jim, that's a really good point. Like thank you for bringing that up. Whatever you model as the behavior is kind of what you're going to get. And again, I just think it's not a kumbaya thing. It's a better outcome. So, environments where there's no psychological safety, no one tells the emperor that they're not wearing any clothes, or they just don't bother using their personal capital to speak up with a better idea or stop someone from making a mistake because there's a personal cost to them. So, and I think the best environments are about learning and get better. You address the mistakes, you talk about it, you get better. There's a famous story with Volkswagen. The CEO abhorred mistakes and failure, and they promised people this engine that was going to get incredible CO2, incredible mileage, and incredible sort of performance. The problem was it didn't, and then the engineers were so scared to tell him this that they went and devised this whole cheating contraption with all their engineering things and cost Volkswagen billions of dollars, rather than like, let's talk about the problem and figure out a solution to the product or the marketing or otherwise. And again, it never look, think about Boeing these days. Like they are digging out of $100 billion of mistakes because of the lack of psychological safety around, we are skirting the rules. This plane isn't safe. We should not launch it. And in trying to save $100 million, they've cost themselves God knows how many billions of market cap and sort of customer orders and brand at this point. So it's just never worth it from a business standpoint.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I don't know a leader out there that would say, I don't want people to tell me what's really going on. I want them to tell me only what I want to hear. But yet they create an environment.
Their behavior, right? Their behavior, they might say it, but their behavior creates that environment. Yeah.
Right. Unknowingly. So what's your advice there to get them to, kind of see this?
Yeah, there's a little bit of a test that's interesting if you want to test it, because I think a lot of people see that. If you have a team, go into a meeting and ask them something completely impossible to do from a deadline or otherwise standpoint, and see if anyone says anything or who's willing to speak up, right? I think that because they're all going to have the discussion once you leave the room, but it's interesting to see who is it, who might feel that they could have the discussion in the room, or be like, Lee, you're freaking crazy. There's no way we could do that if we wanted to do that. And literally, really, it is impossible. And so that's a interesting test if you're not sure whether you have that.
Yeah. It all goes to organizational trust. So I love that. And it has to be earned, and it obviously can be destroyed, pretty quickly. I view organizations as these value creation machines that we're designing. I think about it like, what are the outcomes? What's the structure? And then let's make sure we get people in seats that set them up for the best chance of success. But I love the way you talk about as a company creates more and more value over time, are the team members and all their different roles appropriately building their capacity or capabilities at the same rate or a little bit more than that. To talk about that.
The simple math, right? We don't have the graph in front of us, but imagine a 45% kind of growth curve. If you're growing annually 45%, just sort of that line right in the middle of 90 degrees. And people have the ability to get 50% better. I mean, that's really hard. 0, 25%. And so you need to plot, you eventually want the people to be growing as fast as they can to try to keep up with those roles. They won't all be able to do it. You can't go from a bookkeeper to a CFO in 4 years, no matter how much Miracle Grow you put on it, right? It just takes some time. And there's a lot of injustice problems and stuff that people want to solve in the world today. And you just can't snap your fingers and say, okay, let's make everyone a partner when they've been an associate for 2 years. And, typically it takes 10 years of learning. But so you have to take a look at what's the demand curve? What does the role need? We needed a marketing manager last year. We need a marketing director. Where does this person sit? Maybe they can go from manager to director, but they can't go to SVP a year later. And then they need to understand that they need to learn under an SVP because the company needs an SVP. And I tell an example in the book and otherwise of, a lot of times this is in finance, that my friend had a super loyal controller. And, she really wanted to be the CFO. She wasn't qualified to be the CFO. He didn't want to lose her, and he let her be the CFO. And she made $1 million tax mistake because she just didn't have this international tax, experience. And that was sort of his fault. And again, so what we want to do is get that controller kind of growing and learning and in a position to be a CFO one day. But you can't just snap your fingers and make it happen. And look, in high growth situations, the player never wants to come out of the game. And this is where I think managers need to make hard decisions and say, look, Lee's doing great and Lee's awesome and we're working Lee and we're growing Lee. But we also need to be really clear about what we need and whether Lee's skill set actually fits that. And maybe what Lee needs is a new mentor manager, and then they can be, in a position to take that role either here or in another organization one day.
Yeah, and there's a distinction here, and I've heard you talk about this in other podcasts of there's capacity, capability, but there's also experience. So you can be wildly smart, the math, and you can line up the steps and it works out great on paper, but in the real world, the experience will show you where the roadblocks are. Talk about the importance of both of those things and how they relate, because some folks expect to get the promotion. They should get this, but they don't have the experience and they don't understand the value of having the experience and why that matters.
Yeah. So look, I think finance continues to be a good example on this. Like you could be a young finance person and you could be growing, but like, again, when a company goes to go public, they want a CFO that's taken a company public. They don't want to play around with learning this on the job or otherwise. When they do an acquisition or they're part of a private and there's going to be international tax implications, like they need someone, who understands that. So people can improve a lot. There's just some experience and some skills that you get over time. There's other jobs where, look, you're two people, again, they could have 1 year, 8 year teaching is kind of like this. Like a first-year teacher could outrank a 20-year teacher, right? They're doing the exact same job, and one could just be better than the other. And inherently, I think those environments are a little unfair. But there's some things where you're just not going to have the experience, and it's hard for people to see if they don't have it. Sometimes they're not giving them the chance, and it really isn't about experience; it's about aptitude. But particularly in like finance roles or legal roles, like you can't just skip some of these things. And I think in certain credentials fields, it's more clear about like why you can't do this, you don't have it. But in a lot of businesses, it's not about credentials. So look, sometimes let's say I needed a salesperson that could manage a $10 million book of business. Well, I might find someone who's taken 10 years to do that. I also might find someone in 3 years who built an $8 billion book of business from zero. I actually might make a bet that for my growing business, the person who went from 0 to 8 in 3 years can probably figure out how to get to 10 and might actually grow faster than the person that's been at 10 for 10 years and hasn't really grown. That's where there's kind of these subjective around kind of capacity and experience. But again, when we get into technical stuff or things that you haven't done, or like if you haven't done international accounting or tax law and you're going to be overseeing an organization that's required to do that, that's a real problem or liability.
Yeah, as we kept upgrading our accounting and tax expertise, it was amazing how one would say, "This, you're getting everything you can get." Then we switch and we find $300,000, and we switch again and we find $1 million, like you're talking about.
They just haven't done it, right? And when you're first growing a business, I've seen a lot of these business boot camps and stuff where, they're explaining to the owner, this is what a bookkeeper does. This is what a controller does. This is what a CFO does. Here's how you need. And they don't understand the difference. They just, this person's the highest level accounting person at your, 100,000 revenue firm might be a bookkeeper. But if you're a $40 million revenue firm, it better not be a bookkeeper, or you've got, you've got some trouble.
Yeah. And I've heard you talk about leadership development, and it's important to be able to take constructive feedback, point out where you're really getting it wrong or you have blind spots. A lot of folks can't do that. They think they know everything, because what we're talking about right here, it's like picking up a $500,000 bill on the floor, right? I mean, it's right, but they don't see enough value in it to even do it. And you've talked about a number of different ways, mastermind groups, other things, but what's your advice for getting, our listeners that are leaders to cultivate their ability to take feedback on their blind spots and where they need to improve?
Yeah, a lot of organizations and people don't know how to give feedback. So it's hard to get it when it's personal and it's not about the behavior, but it's about a character. The worst thing ever is to give someone feedback on someone's character, right? Like, Lee, you're just not strategic. Well, it sounds like something I was born with and that I can't fix, right? You're not smart. You're not whatever. Versus you could say, like, that was not a strategic decision you made. That was not a smart decision. And let me explain why. And here's how you could fix that for next time. So the problem is a lot of people don't know how to give the type of feedback that sounds like it's about them when it really should be about the other person. The other person should be like, wow, this is something I can get better and not make this mistake again. And the famous example of Kim Scott and, her whole radical candor empire came because Sheryl Sandberg was her boss at Google, and Kim came out of a meeting and with all the lead brass at Google and thought she killed it. And Sheryl was like, Kim, you say like every other word. And Kim sort of blew it off. And then Sheryl was like, so let me be clear, like, you don't sound smart when you do that. And I want to help you and I can get you a speaking coach or otherwise, but like, you can't go into the executive meetings and sound like that. It doesn't give you credibility. And what Kim realized and went to build a whole career on this radical candor was that Sheryl wasn't trying to be mean. Sheryl was offering to help her. She was showing a blind spot. She was actually trying to make her better. And when she opened her eyes to that, everything changed. And again, she went to build this whole business on how do you give people sort of radical candor. So look, as leaders, we need to model that we're open. We need to see other people, let other people on the team question us. They need to know that if you come to open door feedback, I always tried to I had people just would call someone, a junior person was upset with something I wrote in a Friday forward that was even separate to the company, and it sort of related to someone. And I said, look, do me a favor, have that person call me and I'll talk to them about it. I don't want to relay it through the grapevine. I want to see that it's totally fine for them to call the CEO and say, look, and we had a really interesting discussion. And look, I don't think I totally agreed with their perspective and they didn't agree with mine, but we both learned something, and I, thank them for it. And I really, appreciate it. I think that's the thing about feedback. You don't always have to agree with it. What you have to do is just listen, not argue about it, and say thank you so that you get it the next time. Because if you start arguing, or even smart people you can see someone, telling you feedback, and you're working on your defense, right? I can see it in your face, which means you're not sort of listening. And it's, again, just listen and take it. I mean, I once got feedback. I was trying to kind of keep everyone, level-headed around a contentious election a few years ago. There was a lot of stress. And I said, look, whatever happens tomorrow, the sun will come out tomorrow. And someone was terribly offended by that. Now, I listened to that feedback or whatever. I 100% disagree with it. But again, I did listen to it, and I took it with an open door policy.
Yeah. It's funny. My team bought me this coffee cup called Candid But Caring. They put it on it. And I think we have to be super candid, but it should never be personal. But even if it is, in their passion for getting the end result, they forget the style. I listen for the substance in there, and whatever it is. Just because somebody's not having a great day or handling something, in a bad way, doesn't mean that we all jump on that bandwagon and create even less value.
No, another good rule for feedback is 72 hours or kill it, right? If feedback is about, not repeating a mistake or getting that thing, you should deliver it pretty quickly, or you should not be allowed to share it. Because what people really hate is when they walk into a performance review 4 months later and you start listing a whole bunch of grievances from 4 months ago. Now that doesn't sound like getting them better. It sounds like a personal attack. Again, you sat on this for 4 months before you told me. So it's that's not super helpful.
Yeah, one of my partners in my current business before he passed, and he became a very good friend, was Jack Welch. Used to run GE, and Jack was a big believer, and everybody should know where they stand and what's expected around performance 100% of the time, no surprises. And I've been this way for decades, and I don't even call them performance reviews anymore. I call them performance snapshots, because everybody knows where they're at. We're just having
if you're having regular conversations, those quarterly things should not be a surprise. They should just be a recalibration of what you've already talked about.
Yeah. I'm curious to get your take on this, because you've built a really interesting and successful company, at which I want to get into. But we've gotten to this place where, a team member will join the company. We agree to pay them, X. The company virtually always pays them 100% of what they agreed to when they said they would. But we've gotten to a place where it seems to be okay for employees to deliver 60, 50, 40% of what they agreed for that pay. How did we get here? What's your view on that?
Yeah, I think there's two charts, and they've had some disconnection, right? There's your compensation and your title and your otherwise, and then there's your expectation and your KPIs and your sort of scorecard indicators. And those should be really closely linked. And if you don't like holding people accountable or otherwise, then it makes it a lot easier for those uncomfortable conversations. So, you get on the weekly meeting and here's what's green and here's what's red. And if you're red for 3 quarters in a row, we shouldn't be talking about a raise or otherwise. So people want the compensation, but I think a lot of times they're not clear about the outcomes and the expectation. Okay, what happens? Well, if we don't meet it, if you don't meet it, we're talking about, moving on from your role. We're not talking about kind of how much more compensation. So I'm always clear to people look, here's what comes with it. Here's the level of responsibility. We have a lot of client service roles. So when we talk about a a director or senior manager, it's like, look, you're expected to handle 90% of the things without escalating. That's what a senior manager is. Or you're supposed to 95% of them, or you handle all revenue issues up to $1 million. So I think that, in the immediacy and the wanting to move around, I think there's the fun part of the above the line, like what's my title and comp, but you just need to really line that up. So all organizations that run, whether it's Rockefeller Habits or Traction or any of these things, so that everything's aligned and people are really clear what's the output, what's the expectation. A lot of times that's just a failure to be clear on what was good delivery. I had someone call me once and they're like, I have a question. You know this industry well. Like, we're looking to hire a sales and marketing person. And I was like, what? Hold up. Right there. Like, what do you mean a sales and marketing person? Like, I'd love to see this JD. My guess is that the salespeople have selling quotas they want from this person, and the marketing people want certain things. And then this is the type of role or thing that if you're not clear up front, they think they're killing it after 9 months and everyone's upset with their performance. That's the worst outcome, where there's a disconnect between the candidate think they're doing a great job or otherwise. Really good and aligned organizations would put in front of you, Lee, we're going to hire you, Lee. And at 6 months, this is what good looks like. This is where you're getting a bonus or you're getting fired. You have 95% retention in your sales. You're dealing with 100%. Like, we're super clear that this is your scorecard in 6 months and a year, because we've all sat down and agreed upon it. So like, you're either signing up for this or you're not signing up for this. That's how you eliminate a lot of these problems.
Yeah, and I'm a big fan of, this is what we expect in the role. These are the 2-4 max outcomes that you're going to be responsible for. You might need these 30 capabilities to be able to achieve the outcomes.
Right. The capability stuff is a distraction, right? Yeah.
Yeah. It's not about activities and all that. And do you understand if you fall below this line, it won't work? Oh, yeah, for sure. And then when you have that conversation, nobody's surprised at all.
Right. You're that list. Here are the 5, like I said, qualities, and you speak French and all that stuff. Great. But here are the 5 things when we sit down in 3 months that we're going to look at and say, are you doing them? Are you doing well? The KPIs. We're going to sit down in 6 months. We're going to sit down in 9 months. They're going to be these things. So if you don't want this quota, if you don't want this responsibility, and by the way, the other mistake that tons of organizations make is that if you're a manager, the number one thing I'm going to rate you on is how you are leading and managing. Right? Not that you're doing like, are you a good manager? That is, I've spoken to more companies where this is the biggest bug in their system, is that they're rating people whose primary responsibility is management as doers. They're grading their production, not their effectiveness at leading others.
Yeah. Super interesting. Acceleration Partners went from, I'm assuming, scratch, that was your business that you started, to over 350 employees. I don't know where it is today. You didn't take any outside money to be able to build that and create that value. So that tells me you definitely brought a lot of value, and you were super frugal and smart along the way. In a world where a lot of folks, with smaller companies trying to get bigger, think they need to raise a bunch of money. You didn't do it. I never did it with any of my businesses, and some of them got quite large. What was your mindset going through that?
Yeah, well, we did bring on a private equity partner a few years back, and we have done some acquisitions. So 80% of that growth was organic, and we've added on top of that. But I never liked losing money, and I think money is a very neutral indicator of value, as you were saying. Around, I think a lot of companies, like, if I don't ask for money for this product or service, or figure out how much people are willing to pay that I can build a business on, I'm not sure that I have a business. And we had a lot of people that deluded themselves for years over this. I mean, think about something like grocery delivery. You might love it at 10% and want to do it all day long, but they're losing their shirt. They make money at 30%, but you're not going to pay for it at 30%. So everyone's just kind of pretending, burning a lot of money, versus saying, like, what's the value prop that you're willing to pay for? So I think there is some real value in scarcity and not having tons of extra resources and try a million things, where you need to get things right and reinvest your capital. And we grew 30% a year for 10 years without outside capital. And I had to be smart. And I would watch all these companies at the time, and they would raise, $1 to make 50 cents of revenue. And I was like, I could do that. Like, our threshold is, how do we spend 10 cents to get $1? Like, raising $1 to get 50% in revenue doesn't seem that hard. So I think that more businesses could benefit kind of, one of the analogies is the sort of opening store model or unit retail model. And I was part of a company that didn't get this right, where you might open like 2 stores and you figure out the perfect blueprint and they're like making a ton of money and they're great at margin. And you're like, over 3 stores, I figured this out. Well, you're going to have to lose some money to get the new stores open, but you actually have a blueprint and you have a plan that says like, at stores that are open in these locations stuff works. So like raising some money to grow on that, like in theory should produce the same outcome. I see too many people, and I was part of business, did this. We have 3 different stores in 3 different places with 3 different footprints. They're not making money. We haven't figured out the formula, and then we're trying to pour gas on it, which doesn't make any sense, right? I don't have a positive unit economic where then it makes sense to go develop new stores. And I think a lot of companies, again, haven't figured out those core product and services.
Yeah. And then why does somebody just sit there and keep working harder, hoping for something different when they don't have something? Because I think you've got idea, you've got proving scalable traction in something, you have packaging it, and then you've got scaling it.
Right.
They don't think through the idea, they don't prove the traction, and then they're working really hard to try to scale something that's unproven. Why does that happen?
Working hard is stupid. Honestly, like working smart is working hard is Marissa Mayer bragging about her 130-hour work weeks at Yahoo, where she acquired 50 companies that were worthless over 5 years and basically destroyed value of the firm with everyone working 100-hour work weeks, right? You can't get by the 80-20 rule. You need to figure out the few things that matter, the customers that matter, the product, the pricing, and spend your time on those and work smart. We'd never try to reward working hard because you'll just get an organization where everyone's valued for time and seat, an hour in the day, and not outcome. None of us hire the salesperson, based on the number of calls they make, right, a week. If salesperson A is 100 calls and 10,000 in sales, and person B is 50 calls and 100,000 in sales, like I'm going to hire salesperson B. Like I don't want to reward them for a lot of useless calls. I want to reward them for the 5 calls that actually make a difference.
Yeah, for sure. I give all my clients, if they want it, one of my Do Less Better t-shirts. Like people are trying to do so many different things instead of what are in fact, I'd love to get your take on this. Most companies I work with, there's usually 2 to 4 max things that create 80% plus of all the value for the organization, even companies that are worth tens of billions of dollars, and yet they're focused on hundreds of things. Talk about that. That's a big thing.
Well, a couple of things. One, I agree with you. And I think the rule of 3 is really prescient. I think it's been proven. I think organizational priorities, quarterly priorities, like getting 2 out of the 3 most important done versus getting 1 out of the 10. Like the more you have, the less you do. The other is if I walk into an organization and I ask the people, like, what are the 3 things that the company's trying to get done this year? And you can't get any answer. You can't get any consensus. That just feels like to me like a prism organization. The light is reflecting everywhere in different directions. The people are running it down. Every really strong organization would be like, here's our 3 goals for the year. And here's everything that everyone's doing around and they're aligned. But I'm surprised how many organizations, they can't even tell you. It's like playing a game and you don't even know like what the score is or what sort of good looks like.
Yeah. Yeah. So Bill, I talk about culture and I say, hey, the goal really should be to connect culture to value creation and building a capacity of sort of building culture. And as the company grows, is everybody keeping up and creating, as much or more value at the rate, that the company is growing? But when you change culture, you have to be super careful coming in. What's your advice on how to start down this road and go way faster than you otherwise would on your own with the right help? But I've seen companies completely blow up when they make too big of a culture shift right away.
Look, culture change is really hard. It's a high degree of difficulty. And it 100% needs to be from the top. And the hope is someone comes in where the culture has not been very strong and they sort of, reestablish it from the top down. But you need to completely change. Again, you need to be clear about your goals, your focus, your values, and just change what you reward. Because at the end of the day, that's what culture is, right? What it's rewarding implicitly and explicitly in terms of financially and that a boy and that a girl and the things that you're congratulating people on. And again, hey, you pulled an all-nighter last night. Uh, shouldn't have done that. Like, did we ask the right questions to not pull an all-nighter last night? Like, rather than like, we're not going to celebrate that kind of around here anymore. So I have seen it done. Gary Ridge is a great example of WD-40 totally turning around that company. It fails more often than not because it's just lip service, or it's not someone really coming in and being like, what we're doing here is broken and we need to fix it. But it needs to come from the top down. And it's just resetting your goals, your values, and then making it really clear that people augment their behavior to what is rewarded. And I said explicit or implicit because I think things are rewarded in different ways. They're rewarded in compensation, they're rewarded in promotions, but they're also rewarded in just what people celebrate or say, good job, or you shouldn't have done that too. And then behavior sort of, works its way around that.
Yeah. I've seen a lot of cultures where the firefighters get rewarded for putting out the fire.
Then you will get arsonists if you reward firefighters.
It keeps going around and around. You said something in a podcast that
it's funny. I just want to say, early on when we made an intentional culture shift in our company, we had that problem. We were rewarding firefighters and they'd become arsonists. And then eventually we were like, look, we don't want the two things that we were rewarding were sort of all-star utility players and fire. And as we got bigger, we were like, I want you to like, what do you want to do? They're like, I want to do a little bit of this, a little bit of that, a little bit. And I'm like, I need you to tell me I want to be an all-star first baseman or an all-star third baseman. We're at the size now that we don't need these all-star utility players. I need to look at you in one thing and hold you accountable for one thing. And people struggled with that because we had rewarded the opposite for so long.
And I think it's scary for folks, right? Oh my gosh, there's a lens on this one thing I'm responsible for rather than this flurry of activity.
Right. So now it's not about keeping busy. Like it's not, we rewarded that because that was the culture from 1 to 3 million. Then at 5 million, it wasn't.
Yeah. Yeah. I heard you talk something around, employees that will build capacity or their ability to create value faster than the organization is growing. And then they kind of get bored, and that can be dangerous and they can leave. And I've always thought of it as, how do we create an environment? And I think this is really good for our listeners to get your thoughts on this, but create an environment where there's no end to where they could go. Like for example, in my aerospace aftermarket business, had a sales guy when he hit his first $1 million, first year working for us, never did it before, thought he had just achieved something that he didn't think was possible. Well, fast forward 15 years, he sold $40 million in a year. So we kept cultivating that ability.
Yeah.
And how do we create environments where everybody's the CEO of their own role and they can see that this is the direction that it can go, and there's literally no end to it, and keep them on that leading edge so they don't get bored? Because when people say they get bored, to me, it's like, oh my gosh, I would never go into business with you, because how could you get bored when they get
bored if that is the thing where you need to grow the company and grow the people, right? Because if people are growing and the company's not growing, then inherently there's just aren't going to be those roles and opportunities for them. I also think there's that old adage, you've seen it, the CFO says, what if we train these people and they leave? And the CEO says, what if we don't and they stay? And so I think you'd be the type of organization who like, look, we're going to build you up, and I hope the opportunity is here. And I talk about this in the book, and this was sort of the, organizations who sort of support people say, look, but if it's not, like, I'm going to put you in the position to be a CFO. And if we don't have the CFO role, like, I'll help you become a CFO, somewhere else. And so again, they just have to see that reason to sort of hang on and to be there. And I call it, there's kind of catch and releasers organizations. Like we're actually like, we're willing and happy to have that person go out and be successful if we don't have the right thing for them.
Yeah. Well, I for sure feel the best about my team members that went off to run, big departments and companies, and a couple of them running companies bigger than what we built together, which is absolutely amazing. And when you say, build your company by building your people, what percentage of leaders out there really do that in your view? Like they set that culture up and they talk about it?
I mean, again, this is like the venture world, almost next to none, because that's haven't been the incentive. It's again, grow. It's get that capsule to Mars. I don't care how many people die along the way. Again, when you're running your own business and you love the people that you work with, like you want to be on that mission and journey with them. You don't want to have to find all new people to be on that journey with. So unfortunately, the press and a lot of the culture sort of celebrate that first type of growth. And again, we were in an extraordinary period where everyone could get away with it. No one had to make money. I don't think the free money period's coming back for a while. So I think it's a little bit of a revenge of this sort of growth capitalism, which is the sustainable growth capitalism, not the grow top line at all costs. Because like that was never a world that we could play in or compete in. But I also didn't really want to. That didn't sound fun. I wanted to work with these people and have them be around and see them take new roles, not, constantly having to swap out the pieces.
Yeah. And over 23 years with my longest running business, and the one that got the largest, I think I changed my senior leadership team out significantly 5 times.
Yeah.
Because we kind of outgrew them, but that didn't mean they all left. And we promoted almost always from within, rarely from the outside in our work, because we were developing like crazy. Talk about the advantages of and disadvantages to both.
Yeah. So, disadvantages, sometimes you need some experience that's non-negotiable, as we talked about. Sometimes actually you need some different perspective and otherwise. But when you think about every new person that's going to come in the organization, can they do the job? And then there's a culture risk, right? And so culture risk has got to be 50% of the risk, that, right person, wrong fit. And so that is always higher with an external employee. And so the question is, again, where do I take those shots? Where do I put someone a little over their head? People over their head tend to work really hard and prove that they want to be there and high aptitude, right? You think about these are the people that have imposter syndrome, which always to me is a higher performer, versus the people that are under their head. When you kind of hire the higher risk outside bit ahead of that road, they come in, they don't love to get their hands dirty, they love to hire people, so they typically now have added a ton of resources and stuff before they've even added any value, and there's just a lot of risk in that. So I think we would rather take the risk on someone we know that they can kind of do it, and maybe give them an escape clause if they don't. But you can't underestimate taking the culture risk off the table with an internal hire, and that is half the risk. And look, like the NFL draft, if anyone, all the AI and everything in the world is on the NFL draft, and it's still not an exact science. So it's kind of no one solved who's the perfect. So there's always a amount of risk, versus the chance that someone goes from being a great culture fit to a terrible culture fit is pretty low, and it would have more to do with some major exogenous change or mental health issue in their life or something else.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. One persona that I've never been able to fix or save is when an individual crosses a line of believing they bring so much more to the table than they actually do. Like, I don't know what to do with that. I've tried. Have you ever been successful with that?
No, people. I posted something on LinkedIn last week, and I said, look, if you're recruiting and you could blood test for one thing, and it would tell you this person had it or not had it, what would you blood test for, right? And that was sort of my question. Mine was self-awareness, because to me, that's about learning, that's about other people, that's about your relationships. And when they just don't have it, the people, one of the biggest indicators is a lot of the people who have moved on or parted ways that had low self-awareness, their goodbye email just manifests this. It takes tons of individual credit for team accomplishments and overstates it just sort of puts the nail in the coffin of the low self-awareness, and that's just a really hard thing to overcome, right? And at some point when you're talking about a 20-year-old versus a 45-year-old, like, I'm going to take a bigger chance on a 20-year-old with not a lot of experience can fix some habits. Once they're 20 years of habits in the workplace, like, unless they want to change them, it's not going to change.
Yeah. The power of developing your own personal values, if you will, your why, et cetera. You spend a lot of time talking about that. Get into that a bit.
Yeah. So I have this thing, and I spoke to a company last week at their annual kind of conference, and I have a slide I share, and that's like, look, another company gave me this is a good leader at our company. And they're kind of the things that leaders do and behave and how they act. But no one could tell someone how they should lead and what style of leader they should be. And I think most people who get into leadership initially just, focus on one of two things that practices that the leaders that they had did before that they really liked, and the opposite of things that leaders that they had did that were pretty terrible that they never want to do. And while that makes intuitive sense, it's not authentic. And everyone has sort of an authentic leadership style that I think is driven by their core values. And a lot of that runs to very formative childhood experiences and traumas and things that have just shaped who they are. And it's better to understand that, run with that, and sort of build from that foundation. I think when Jim Collins talks about level 5 leadership, like deep place of authenticity, like, hey, look, I'm someone who needs to make things better. And there's a whole bunch of deep reasons why that exists in my life, but that's who I am. And so if you're on my team and you want new challenges and opportunities and stuff, you're going to love that. If you're on my team and you want like calm and consistency and whatever, like I'm not your guy for that. Right. And just that honesty. I mean, I've seen people with deep things of trust and they lead from trust. And it's like they either trust you or don't trust you, but they didn't have the verbiage to tell people that on their team. What they just had was a whole bunch of people in the penalty box who didn't, with the key thrown out, who didn't know that because they came to some meetings late, they missed a deadline, they couldn't be found one afternoon. And the person's like, and again, that trust probably came from a deep violation of trust. And so soon this person can't be trusted, and boom, they're in the penalty box. And when you peel this stuff back with leaders and start to help them understand how they could use this and how they communicate this, and that leader could onboard someone on their team and just say, look, trust is super important to me. And I trust everyone until I don't. It's really hard to get back. And here are the type of things that on my team that sort of erode trust, right? That just produces a much better outcome. And so, yeah, we spend a lot of time helping people understand their personal core values. I think most people kind of understand when they're in the realm of their core values, but they can't articulate it. They can't say, these are my core values. Like my core value is, respectful authenticity like mine, or, health and wellness, or, finding a better way and sharing it. And once they do that, it just, the decisions and how they lead and everything just becomes a lot more authentic.
Yeah, incredibly powerful. I've heard you talk about different tools and to understand, a person's personality and what they're good at or not good at or more apt to want to do, et cetera. I found most of employees don't really understand. I landed on one called Personalysis that I put thousands through and they loved it, but there had to be a consulting piece that went with it to get them to explore. Yeah. I think tools are important, but they as long as they work, right?
Yeah, they have to work. They have to be easy. I think that there's some that some people like that I don't like. We've done the why system. We've done Colby. We've done strength finders. I found the why stuff to be incredibly powerful. A lot of these things are called personality. Like the Myers-Briggs is too hard because, again, and I don't love the what's the other one that everyone likes? I like strength finders. Again, simple. Here are the words. The other one with the circles and the wings, and that like you need a consultant and a dictionary to do it, versus like for me, the why, I'm like, what's your why again? They're like, make sense of things. I'm like, oh, okay. As a better way person, I know where our communication problems are going to be. But they're not personality tests. But when you do enough of these, you start to see the consistency around how you show up, how you act, things that you say, the other types of personalities that, I mean, we had one where we had a disc consultant and he asked the room like a series of questions based on the quadrant that you were standing in. And the room just answered the questions totally differently. Like, how many of you would do X? And the people standing in D all raised their hands. So you just see how much these things drive behavior. There's no right or wrong. And you actually want diversity. A lot of times without even knowing the answers to these tests, people will hire the same thing because they just sense it in the interview process. You want diversity, but then you need to understand like those differences, because it's a lot of navigating communication challenges and otherwise. Like differences are a strength, but they become a weakness when people get frustrated. Most people actually marry the opposite. And then someone once told me they cheat with the same, because when they get frustrated, it's easier to go to the person that's just got all the same strengths and weaknesses. But that creates a whole different set of problems.
Yeah. And I think so many times folks are running at it. Am I doing this thing right? Instead of, will this help me create more value in my life and in the organization?
Yeah, like again, it's not putting you in a bucket and defining who you are and sort of, sentencing you to that thing. But what it is doing is giving you some understanding and some playbook, and particularly in difficult communication situations, I find if you're to like look at these things and like, okay, Lee and I are really butting heads over this, like, and then I look and I see Lee's this and that, and I'm like, oh, this could possibly explain that we just have a really different orientation around this. And how could I approach this a little bit differently with Lee?
Yeah, makes total sense. This is such good stuff. One thing I want to touch on, we just have a few minutes left. Affiliate and partnership marketing, wildly valuable. More and more and more people are doing it these days. What's your, if you can do it, what's your pithy advice for getting it right? Because the last thing all of my customers want is for me to inundate them with a bunch of stuff that other people want me to. And I get so many emails and so many texts, and it's like, please stop the noise. You've done it obviously really well with your organization. What's the secret?
Yeah, in terms of look, I think anything that you do is not rush into it because someone else is doing it, but figure out like what you want to do. If it makes sense, set it up well. Get someone with experience, on how to do that. The worst thing is like, hey, I heard so-and-so is just doing that. Let me copy that. And I hear a lot of people say, look, you might have just copied a strategy that's not working for them. And then don't try to do things yourself if you haven't done it before. So I like the affiliate model because it's kind of win-win. And for a lot of brands, they can basically pay for their marketing after they have their sales. But again, it's not something you want to do for the first time if you've never done it on a high scale. So it's always good to kind of consult with experts and make sure it makes sense for your business.
And your business, you help companies think through that.
So our business is about is about supporting companies who are launching kind of global affiliate and partner programs.
Okay. All right. Fantastic. If our listeners want to learn more about the work you're doing, Bob, where can they go?
So everything, my Friday Forward books, all this stuff is at Robert Glazer, GLAZER.com.
All right. Thank you. And as you reflect on this discussion, what was your one biggest takeaway from this discussion?
We talked about a lot. I think I always kind of come back to the importance of leaders really understanding what they value personally. There's a lot of talk about corporate values, or what are we value collectively. And obviously there should be some alignment with what I value personally from what we value collectively, but we're all going to be different within that. And I think understanding that is really the key to unlocking a lot within an organization.
Yeah, that's great. My biggest takeaway is, if we're going to do anything, it should be done with the intent of making things measurably better. So understand what culture means, understand what goal setting means, understand all this stuff. Don't just sort of what I call business virtue signal. Sink your teeth into it and do it with the right intent.
Virtue signaling is the worst. I just wrote an article on that. Do it because there's some organizations. I thought someone was very critical of an organization. I won't mention it, but for the reasons of like if you're going to support a cause and people get frustrated around it, you can't abandon it, or you can't abandon it in the areas where people don't like it and then support it in the areas where people like it. Like that's virtue signaling rather than being like, no, we value this. And so it's going to cost us something and we're going to take the pain and we're going to lose the customers here. Otherwise it's just clever marketing and virtue signaling.
Yeah. Let's practice real virtue, not virtue signaling. And to me, virtue is creating objectively measurable value in the world, and virtue signaling is, obviously, something else. And you're either creating value or taking it out of the world. And let's practice real virtue. That's good for all of us to run that direction. Well, thanks again so much for your time today.
Thank you for having me.
Really appreciate it. And this has been the Show Your Value podcast, where we explore the art of value creation. If you got some value out of today's show, please like and leave a review. And until next time, go forward and show your value to the world.